Good evening, everybody. We're live NFL Week 15 opening lines reaction show plus NFL Week number 14 recap. I'll talk about everything that we just watched on Sunday unfold in the NFL. We'll go game by game, talk about everything. Then we'll go game by game for the Week 15 opening lines odds towards the end of the show. We're all watching the Bills game. We're all watching the Rams and Bills play in a 44-42 shootout. The Bills get indoors, and those scoreboards get out of control in a hurry. Don't know what they were thinking calling the quarterback sneak. Don't know what they were thinking calling the timeout after the sneak. It was still north of a minute. I mean, they had time there to get back up and run another play. Calling that timeout effectively puts them in a spot where the game is going to be over, even if the Rams do not get a first down. You guys let me know in the chat as we go. Did they end up getting the first down? Is it iced? I have the banner in as 44-42. We'll see if we have to change that between now and the end of the show. Good to have everybody in the chat so far to start here on the Sunday evening show. Here's what I will say. I was looking at some odds at a couple of the regulated books to start the show. I'm seeing the Bills around 6-1 to win the Super Bowl. I've been pretty stuck on Chiefs-Eagles, the preseason prediction for the majority of the season. I will say, if you wake up on Monday morning, maybe you're listening to this on Monday morning or later tonight, you're checking the odds, and you see Buffalo at 6-1 to win the Super Bowl, worth putting in the account, in my opinion, at that price. I believe that that is a team that has all of the pieces there to make the run. And today, even in the loss, we're showing things that we just haven't seen from a Bills team in the last couple seasons. Expecting Kincaid and Coleman to come back for Week 15. I think the trajectory there for the Buffalo Bills is pretty high. And we will see tonight with the Kansas City Chiefs, who my entire week is in the balance with the Kansas City Chiefs. We've got them on the service, have them on a couple of other shows. It's a big position for me personally. We obviously need it in the service as well. A good run going over there, but there's a lot tied into KC. We were ahead of Humphreys. We were ahead of the McConkey stuff. We see the market reacting. Another pro group just played the side. We're seeing that number push up. The KC win is going to flip that Bills urgency around next week. Perhaps this game, especially in the first half, we'll talk about it in a recap, was a bit of a exhale spot for the Bills. But my goodness, the trajectory here is pretty high for this Buffalo Bills team, even in the loss. We'll touch on that as we get to the game recap in a couple of minutes. All right. Here we go. The Minnesota Vikings 42, Atlanta Falcons 21. First game on the rotation board that we will talk about here in the recap. And this was almost, and I mean almost, it was very, very close to another one of those just bizarre box scores that we see out of the Atlanta Falcons. And it was that way for like three quarters. I'm looking at the box score, and the numbers that are Atlanta that they're putting up were just crazy. But this turned out in the end to be an absolute banner day for Sam Darnold. 22 of 28 for 347, 12.4 yards a pass, 5 touchdowns. His legs were great. I mean, just a little bit of extra timing to extend plays, to open things up downfield was terrific. He finishes 12.4% above expectation. And I mean, for Atlanta, there was no answer for Jefferson. There was no answer for Addison. This was the Vikings offense playing at its peak level, and it was incredibly impressive. As I mentioned, the Falcons were moving the football consistently through the first three quarters. They were finding a lot of success doing it. They were able to move it, especially on the ground. You think about the Minnesota Vikings, the big weakness for this Vikings team that we're really going to see tested down the stretch is absolutely the run defense. And we saw that today when Atlanta was able to get it moving with both backs. We're having a ton of success doing it. And then Cousins got forced into passing scenarios. And then we saw the turnovers come. There was the fumble. There was the interception. He threw 2 of them. He should have thrown 3 of them. Andrew Van Ginkel dropped a interception that was just a no-brainer, one-handed pick, one he usually makes. And then there was a simultaneous possession catch that also should have gone for an interception. And it showed the replay, and Drake London's hand was off the ball. That actually led to a Falcons scoring drive after that. And so this game should have looked a lot worse for Cousins in the interception column than it did. Interesting game to watch back and forth. Once the turnovers started piling up in the third and the fourth quarter, the Vikings were just marching down the field. They were getting things going in the run game with Aaron Jones. Darnold was unstoppable. The pass game was unstoppable. That was the Vikings offense playing at its peak, and a Falcons team that has a lot of holes on both sides of the football. A little bit of pressure still from them today as they were able to get to Darnold. He had over a 3-second per snap time to throw. And so it was a improving Falcons pass rush, but just behind in coverage. A lot of issues there for Atlanta. Impressive game from Minnesota. Impressive win as well. New Orleans 14, New York Giants 11. This was kind of a sneaky game. The Saints got just blasted in the market all week. A lot of that was driven by the Giants' injuries, O-line, D-line, bunch of guys banged up for New York, and Saints money just poured into the market. Saints lead 7-3 at half, and that was off of a 98-yard touchdown drive that they were able to put together. But this game, ultimately, the Saints not covering and how the game played out all came down to the Saints' inability to finish and mistakes that they had. Missed 53-yard field goals, a 60-yarder, turned the ball over on downs at midfield, and that was only in the first half. The Giants only had one drive in the first half that went for more than 12 yards. The Giants' offense overall did nothing for about 3.25 quarters in this game. It was all Saints moving the football, their inability to score, turning it over, missing field goals. The Giants just could not sustain any offense at all. Drew Lock leads a touchdown drive and puts the point spread in doubt into the fourth quarter, 14-9 for the Saints. A 2-point conversion pass is thrown. It hits someone at the line, tips up in the air. This thing is in the air for a couple 500s as you're counting it back in the old high school playground game, whatever you're playing with, the throwing it up in the air and hoping for it. It falls in the hands of a Giants receiver. He backs into the end zone, and it gets the game to 14-11, pulls the Giants within the cover. Saints fail to do anything on offense. Derek Carr tries to leap at defender, gets upheaved, ends up falling on his non-throwing arm, has now a concussion, has a non-throwing hand injury. He's out of the game, so the Saints offense dies out. They give it back to the Giants, who lead a long drive to set up a field goal that would send the game into overtime. And as a Saints backer out there, you're probably watching this and saying, okay, make the field goal, Saints win the toss, go down, score, Saints still win and cover. All of this money during the week for the Saints is justified. What happens? Gano gets blocked at the line of scrimmage. Now, I bring all of this up and finish on this point because of this. The Giants could possibly, and they are to an extent, being praised for tanking. That was not a tank. That was an incredible defensive play by Brees on the defensive line, a big fella that jumped over the line and made an awesome play. I mean, that was Gano trying to make the kick. That was not the Giants intentionally missing it. There's always going to be tank conversation. As a Giants fan, you're happy that that occurred, but that was very much the Giants looking to try the game and just an incredible effort by the defender to get over the line of scrimmage and block the kick. And so even though the game has the box score reading even and yards per play is right dead equal and yardage overall is quite equal, this was the Saints dominating for a little more than 3 quarters and then the Giants coming back late and padding the stats. It's a 14-11 final, but I would say the Saints certainly deserved better based on how they played. Jacksonville 10, Tennessee 6. Not a lot to say for this game. This is two dead teams playing each other in a game that finished. I mean, there were still games that were early fourth quarter, and this game was done and off of the scoreboard. It went by so quickly, and not a lot to really talk about in this game. Jags opened the first half and go into halftime with 3 possessions. Pick, punt, pick. Titans can't do anything off of it. Field goal, punt, turnover. They kick a field goal out of the half to take a lead, and then they turn the ball over 2 more times on downs to end the game due to Tennessee Titans. The Jags take one of those drives back, 7 plays, 81 yards, a big catch by Thomas, and it was really a game where the Titans stopped inside the Jags' 10-yard line twice, but never really felt like they were threatening to score. It was just ugly from the Titans' offense. Again, both of these teams are dead. There's not a whole lot to say or take away from this game. The Titans' run defense looked a little bit better this week than it did against the Washington Commanders. That's very much more to do with the Jags' rushing offense than anything. Really not a lot to take away that is really actionable from either of these teams in this game. Tampa Bay 28, Las Vegas 13. Buccaneers win and cover against the consistent Raiders money that came in throughout the week. The 7.5s were taken out. The 7s were taken out. Got to 6.5. Never fully got back to 7. There was real Raiders money all week. Even with how the injury report got a little bit weird down the stretch, that was still there. Now, this reads 28-13. And if you were following it today, maybe you had the red zone on and you were watching other games, you probably saw that this was a 1-score game for the majority of the second half and especially late. And there was the big catch by the Buccaneers late to extend this from 21-13 to 28-13 and put this away. This game was much more one-sided than the score and the scoreboard on the ticker you might have seen presented for the duration of the game. The Buccaneers outgained the Raiders 420 to 286, and there's some noise in that 286. 7.1 to 4.5 per play, plus 0.31 in net EPA per snap, and plus 10% on the net success rate. It was completely one-sided in favor of the Buccaneers, but this was a story of Tampa Bay turnovers, mistakes, and errors. Mayfield threw 2 picks in the first half, and the Buccaneers fumbled. Those were either at midfield or across on the Raiders side of the field. They had 3 drives that went for 90 combined yards that turned out empty. And so there was a lot of noise early in the game where the Buccaneers just weren't finishing on drives or giving back to the Raiders. Las Vegas, once they lost O'Connell, got a little bit of a bump from Ritter, who was using his legs to extend plays. But really, you look at the final numbers for Ritter in this game. He was 6.4% below expectation on the plays that he was in the game. I don't see him as an upgrade at all. And those drives that Ritter led were when the Buccaneers were up 8 and then 15, respectively. And so I say there's some noise in the 286. That was inflated a bit by the Raiders' final 2 drives. This was a game that should have been a wider margin win for the Buccaneers. And it's surprising because, again, the Raiders were really taking clear money throughout the week. So this was a game that the Buccaneers end up winning and covering. And in terms of the Buccaneers' future, we talked about on the Wednesday live stream in the South, big win for Tampa, big loss for Atlanta. You get those 2 flipped. Now the strength of schedule really swings in favor of the Buccaneers down the stretch. Pittsburgh 27, Cleveland 14. Impressive win for the Steelers. Impressive cover as well, because it was done without Pickens, their best wide receiver. And even without it, the Steelers were still able to get revenge for the Thursday Night Football loss a couple weeks ago. The box score shows the Pittsburgh Steelers winning by 30 yards, having a slight advantage in net yards per play, net success rate, and net EPA, but it was a very fine margin. What I will say is, similar to the Tampa Bay Las Vegas game, this felt much more one-sided than the box score and the advanced stats read. I mean, I'm looking at the post-game numbers and the stats, and this is nearly a 50-50 game, and I see 27-14 and the Browns scoring late to make it even closer than it was. It really wasn't as close as it was. I look at what happened. It was Jameis and the variance that he brings to every game. It makes the Cleveland Browns so difficult to back, because I know that on social, there's a lot of love for Jameis. Everybody wants to prop him up. But if he didn't have that support and that comedy, and I mean, we all love him. If that didn't exist, we would talk about Jameis Winston in the same way we might talk about Will Levis in games where he's hyper-aggressive, pushing the ball downfield and taking a bunch of chances. And I think that offsets just how much variance he brings to this offense and how drastic some of the results can be. So he throws 2 picks. One of them immediately leads to a touchdown drive for the Steelers, who take advantage of it. The other one was in the red zone around the Pittsburgh 18-yard line. Hopkins missed 2 kicks inside 45 yards. Ford was pushed backwards 5 yards on a midfield 4th down and 1. It was just mistakes on mistakes on mistakes, and it's a reflection of what we see from the Browns, just like we saw on Monday Night Football against the Denver Broncos. That's kind of what you get with this team when Jameis is leading it. And while the points might be tempting, just what he opens up for potential score lines makes it a really tough team to handicap. Now, Russ without Pickens, pedestrian, 39% passing success rate. That's a 20th percentile number. I think it's the worst game we've seen Russ play with this offense. I would put it in the same category and perhaps slightly worse than that Ravens game. And that was a much more difficult opponent in the Baltimore Ravens. 2 times in the division, we've seen Russ take a bit of a step back, but obviously Pickens to this offense means a lot with those deep shots downfield on 3rd down that they're so willing to take and cashing in on so often. Needs to be out there for the Steelers to be able to play to their best. And this game benefited a lot from the Cleveland Browns mistakes that were made, but they get the revenge, they get the win, they get the cover. Philadelphia 22, Carolina 16. Frustrating game. And I say that because I had the Eagles minus 12.5. That was a loss along with the Vikings win and cover. Hopefully the Chiefs tonight end up settling the week on a positive note. And I say that it was frustrating because at times, the Eagles and these on-field matchups that they had just look completely dominant. But what I don't understand, I guess I do to some extent, but what I don't understand is why the Eagles were so willing to go foot off the gas and insert Gainwell into some drives. I didn't get it, because this is a game where the Eagles, when they had the full offense out there, were marching up and down the field. I'm going to be curious to see what the snap counts are. It just felt like, especially out of the half, where the Eagles were up 14-10 with the ball, no Barkley. They bring out Gainwell. They're pushing down the field. They settle for a long field goal. They end up missing it. It gives the ball right back to Carolina. Could have been a spot where they put the game away, and they just weren't really willing to do it. And again, later in the game, you're at home. It's a tighter game than expected. You're right on the edge of field goal range. It's a short yardage scenario. Like go for it. You have these big advantages on offense. You're moving the football. You're not having issues doing it. They take the delay of game. They end up punting back to Carolina, up 6, the worst lead to have in football, and it nearly cost them at the end of the game. And so they had plenty of potential in this game to expand this lead to double digits and beyond. And I don't want to say there was like a lollygagging effort, but it was just not, it wasn't as aggressive as it should have been. And so naturally the conversation is going to go, well, this is a letdown game for the Philadelphia Eagles. But I actually don't think it was. And I'll touch on the first quarter stuff in a second, but I'm saying I don't think it was, because the Panthers stat lines were quite underwhelming. They had the drive at the end of the game that pushed the stats up, but it still counts because it was a game that was tight in a one-possession game. But that entire game for Carolina was the Panthers getting bounce after bounce after bounce, especially on 3rd and 4th down. Adam Thielen alone had 6 third-down conversions. The 4th down attempt inside the Eagles' 5 was like the Giants' 2-pointer, hits a lineman, pops up in the air, falls right into his arms. He backs up and gets the first down. There were a couple different drives this game. Another one where Bryce Young is in the end zone, makes an incredible play to break free and finally get down the sideline. It's like a bounce here or there, and the Eagles are off the field in an advantageous area of play, and they just couldn't get any bounce to go their way. Everything went the way of the Panthers. I really don't think it was that much of a letdown, but it was odd how it played out, with the Eagles not quite willing to be as aggressive as we've seen them, and then all these bounces going the way of the Panthers. Now, people will point to the letdown and say the Eagles were trailing 3-0 at the end of the first quarter. Here's what baffles me about the Philadelphia Eagles this season. Through 14 weeks, Philadelphia is 31st in EPA per play on offense and 28th in success rate on offense in the first quarter. That's shocking to believe, considering the Eagles' record and how many wins they have now stacked on the season and how dominant they have been at times. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quarter combined, they're 2nd. These slow starts for the Eagles and their inability to get the offense going early must change down the stretch. My theory is that this is Nick Sirianni and some of his scripting of plays and what he wants to see coming out that is just throttling the offense. And then that wears off and the Eagles have to react to the game state. And then we see the offense open up out of necessity in a way. We really haven't seen the Eagles trailing a ton this season. Every time that they have, they've looked very good playing catch up. But even in tighter games, you get to the second quarter and beyond and everything opens up. But my God, these first quarters for Philly, atrocious. And this is another one. And what baffles me is you think about it. The Carolina Panthers cannot stop the run. Saquon Barkley still with 20 touches, had a massive game. His prop number closed at 115.5. Crazy. You would think in the first quarter, like just get the ball to Barkley and run. And still they were unable to do that. And so it's surprising to me how the Eagles continue to start slow. Let's see if this is something that catches up to them into the later part of the season, especially in the postseason. I mean, they have to fix this going forward. They have to figure out a way to get it going. Miami 32, New York Jets 26. Jets officially eliminated from playoff contention. To rub salt on the wounds here, you guys know my stance with the Jets. I went on Facebook Marketplace because I was selling a golf club and I posted the ad. But in the timeline on the feed, they have the memory section. And it posted a memory from 2010. So we're going back 14 years. And I had a post that was celebrating the Jets clinching playoff contention with a win. That was obviously the last time they did so. And the drought continues officially today as they're mathematically eliminated, cannot make the playoffs. And so between the way that this game played out, how they found another way to lose a game, and then I see that post that I happened to log into, it was just brutal, a gut punch in many ways. But honestly, and joking aside, the way that the Jets find ways to lose games every week is pretty astonishing. And the final box score shows a pretty compelling case for why the Jets should have won this game, but it was much more one-sided than this. The Jets were plus 60 yards overall, even with the Dolphins getting the final 2 drives of the game, which were both scoring drives. The Jets still finished plus 0.7 per play, and Rodgers had his best game in advanced stats of the entire season. And remember, it's important to point this out because the Dolphins had the final drive of the fourth quarter. The Jets had a meaningless play, and then they won the toss and went down the field. So you think about those numbers and how one-sided that box score implies the game should be, and the fact that the Dolphins had those 2 drives back-to-back to end the game that padded a lot of those numbers. It was an impressive game from the Jets. Now, defensively, there's problems, which without Sauce Gardner, they're going to have a lot of issues defending wide receivers, especially ones with speed. It was a big game for Miami for Hill and Waddle, something we haven't seen from them in a long time. When Gardner's not out there and Reed is forced to be cornerback number 1, there's always a spot on the field for opposing offenses to pick on. And the Dolphins just took advantage of it. Jonnu Smith didn't make his first catch till overtime. They didn't need to use him because the matchups were so easy for wide receivers. With all of that said, Dolphins offense was still pretty impressive, but the only reason that the Dolphins won this game was because of the Jets' inability to finish inside the red zone. They settled for field goals on drives that went to the Miami 10, 7, and 17, and then another one just outside of the red zone from the 22. Jets were moving the ball up and down the field. It was another bad day for the Dolphins defense, another game where they struggled to tackle. The Jets just couldn't finish drives. And that was the story of this game as the Dolphins get out of it with a win and a cover. I'm still worried about the Dolphins defense. They're still alive in the playoff picture. I'm blown away by the Jets and how the season turned out to be and how that finished down the stretch for them. And this was another example of so many of the issues that they have. Seattle 30, Arizona 18. Awesome game, entertaining. These NFC West games just live up to the hype every week. I know the NFC North is awesome to watch, but these games in the West are just awesome every single week and will continue to be. We get a great one Thursday night. Every game matters. It's been elimination games effectively for the last couple of weeks. This is a game that swung the make-miss playoff probability for both of these teams 50% either way. Big boost to the Seahawks, big blow to the Cardinals. Awesome game, 30-18. The story of this game, simply put, Kyler Murray under pressure, facing man coverage. Second drive of the game, interception. Third drive of the game, interception. Both of those go immediately for short field touchdowns for the Seattle Seahawks. What was 7-0 early for the Cardinals, driving down the field, having a ton of success, quickly on a dime, turns around, and it goes 17-7. And the Cardinals were never able to get into it again. And once you fall behind by a deficit like that against this Seahawks defense and the way it is built, it is very hard to mount any type of comeback, especially when you're a Cardinals team like this that is getting a little bit predictable, but also it's just Murray in the pocket against these defenses that show a lot of man, that are able to get a lot of pressure. The O-line's inability to block up against these simulated pressures from Mike McDonald just overwhelmed them up front. And Murray was under duress for the duration of the game. They had one good drive in the second half, but that was it. And it just got to a point where if you're down multiple scores against the Seahawks defense, it's going to be very, very tough to come back. And the Cardinals certainly suffered from that. Box score wise, it was the Seahawks, even with the Cardinals late drive on the missed field goal that hit the upright. The Seahawks were a full yard per play better. They were more than 2 yards per pass better as well. So pretty dominant in this game from Seattle, who get away with another win to stay atop the NFC West. That is a gritty, gritty football team that is playing very tough. LA Rams 44, Buffalo 42. Another NFC West game, another thriller. We talked about this at the top. Bills are loaded. This is a very good Buffalo Bills football team. What I believe we saw in this game was two things, especially early in the game. One, a little bit of an exhale from the Bills. They clinched the division last week. They elected not to bring back Coleman and Kincaid for this week. Both guys were at practice. Coleman was still in a non-contact jersey. Have to think that they're playing it a bit safe with both of those guys. And so off the big win against San Francisco, you're going across the country, get into this matchup, little bit of a slow start, bit of an exhale. You clinched the division. You didn't bring your guys back. Okay. And the Rams get out and they jump them early. A 24-14 lead at the half. And the Bills defense, it cannot get off the field. The second thing that we saw a handful of times in this game is the one weakness of this Bills defense. They're still weak defending the run. It's been a problem with the Bills defense for a number of seasons. But what they're doing this year to try mask and negate that is really dialing up some pretty aggressive run blitzes. But what happens is with a lot of these run blitzes, when they're mistimed, it leaves the coverage behind them very vulnerable. They're a very good defense when they're not sending those extra guys and playing coverage, extremely hard to beat. When they are taking some of those gambles and you're facing a team like the Rams that has those elite outside wide receivers, not only do they become a bit vulnerable, but it's just the one part where they're weak as a defense. And the Rams, I mean, they timed everything up perfectly. And we saw some just incredible play from Stafford and Kupp and Nakua, some of the catches, some of the throws. So it was a bit of an exhale. It was playing a team that has that elite personnel to take advantage of that one small weakness. And then you just got Stafford and this offense and McVay in one of those games where they don't miss. And that was the story of this game. Once we saw the Bills and that urgency late, and they were forced to play catch up. I mean, look at the final drives. Touchdown, 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 touchdown for the Bills. They were walking up and down the field, and that's still without their two best offensive weapons on the field. And so when I'm talking about the Bills and this outlook and the Super Bowl and 6-1 as a future to consider taking, I mean, the pieces are here. Even in a loss, you're seeing what this can look like. And this is also a Bills team that is getting indoors and becomes a completely different team than what we see when they play back at home. And today was evident of that too. It is very clear to me that Josh Allen is the MVP. And if this game did not prove that, I have a hard time sympathizing with an argument and hearing it out otherwise. I mean, this was, to me, the game, even in a loss, that really seals the bid for how impactful he is going to be for this team. And so, all of that said, the Rams get away. They keep the playoff hopes alive. A massive game Thursday Night Football against the 49ers. But this Bills team is very, very real. Last game up to recap, San Francisco 38, Chicago 13. I hope that sides and totals end up 2 for 2 with the Chiefs win and the big Chiefs win tonight with a lot at stake on that one in Sunday Night Football. However, I did a decent job this week, I feel, mentally looking back at everything. I regret not playing Pittsburgh, but there were games this week where I could have got out of hand and got in a bad way. And I managed to talk myself out of a couple games. It was frustrating to have to do so. This was certainly one of them. If we go back to the Wednesday live stream, we are talking about how this is just two great spots and classic handicapping angles going against each other. The Bears money came. We talked about it Thursday morning, Friday morning on the pod, how the Bears were going to get bet. They did. It closed 3. There's a wave of money on the Bears. It's not a secondhand patting on the back, but to have avoided the interim head coach bump up and to see this game play out in the way it did was a bit of a relief. But at the same time, it was frustrating not to play the Niners in a bit of an all-in spot to save the season. And we certainly saw that from them. We've all by now probably seen the tweet that went around. It was 315-4 for total yardage in this game at the half in favor of the 49ers. Going into the half, the Bears were minus 0.2 yards per play. It was a complete no-show from Chicago. And you start to look at Thomas Brown elevated into the role and just wonder if he's at all equipped to be a head coach. If this team wasn't responding for Matt Eberflus, what was this from Chicago? We know the Bears are a dead team, now 4-9. They've been very competitive. There's also an element of fatigue that sets in. When you have all these close games in the division, you can't get over the hump. What rightfully so, and I completely agree with it, usually is viewed as a bump was anything but in this game, as it was an absolute no-show. In this game for San Francisco, everything clicked, even with the injuries. Purdy, 20 for 25, 325, and 2 touchdowns, looked great, had some awesome throws. The offense was clicking and took advantage of everything that this Bears defense had. So simply put, it was dominant from the 49ers, a no-show from the Bears, more than 4 yards per play, the better were the 49ers, and this scoreline at 38-13, every bit deserving of the margin of victory for the 49ers. Before we get into the Week 15 opening lines reaction, there's a lot of games to talk about. I want to catch up on some comments. I'm saying hello to Gerard Morris, who I know is thrilled. He's thrilled every week for the Seahawks. You haven't had a bad Sunday in about a month and a half, Gerard. So I'm glad to see you back for another one. How about them Seahawks? You're pumped up, and rightfully so. DT plus the points is coming in with the grammatical correction and interception, not interception. Why is it so hard to be grammatically correct? Love the content, but it drives me nuts. So I think this is probably an accent thing, but I get called out for this. I get called out for all of versus all of the sudden, even though I don't intentionally say either one. I also get called out for saying spot more times than I should in a podcast. And so we can add this to the list of grammatical and punctuational errors that drive listeners nuts. I will say, as a podcast host, the fact that people are listening closely enough to bring things up like this is kind of a compliment. And so I will try to do better with that. But I will say, I think it is kind of a speech thing where it's said it, but it's presented differently, talking a different way. Ryan Roberts says, Allen MVP ticket holders feeling a little bit better after that unreal performance. I completely agree. I think that 9-1 is looking very, very good from before the season. Let's get to the Week 15 openers. We've got the KC game kicking off in about 13 minutes, and so I'll get through some of the ones I don't have much of an opinion on quickly, and then I'll spend a little bit of time on a few games that deserve it. There are definitely some games here to look at and reference. Gerard says it in the chat. If you're enjoying the live stream here on YouTube, there's a subscribe button down below. There's a thumbs up button as well if you would like to hit it. Thursday Night Football. LA Rams on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. What was 3 is now 2.5 for the Niners at FanDuel, DK, and Bet Online. That number is most definitely going to come down. I would expect this to get to Pick'em might be low. I do think that this absolutely trends down. And so if you are seeing the 2.5 at FanDuel or DK and you kind of have a lean towards the Rams, I think that number is going to shorten and the Rams are going to take money. The total from 47 on the look ahead is out to 48. Could see that getting a tick higher would be my first reaction to it. It is not obviously played in LA indoors. That changes things. Are the 49ers deserving of the same total that the Bills were indoors? I think that's going to be kind of a stopping point. That LA game against the Bills this week closed at 51, but it was lingering around 49.5 for much of the week. What I will say about this game, like we saw with Arizona and Seattle earlier today, these late games where there's a big chunk of miss playoff probability on the line this year, starting to really take on the same profile they did last year in December, these games find a way to really fly over the total because teams just are not going down running the football. They're airing it out. They're leaving everything out there. And we saw that from the Cardinals Seahawks game today where both teams come out throwing the football. This sure seems to me to take on that similar profile. The question is, how high is too high? Washington on the road at New Orleans. Commanders from 3 out to 7. Derek Carr with the hand injury. I would be very surprised if he is able to play in this game. The market is showing that. I think this is mostly pricing in his absence. I'd say this is 85 to 90% of the way there. Could even argue a touch higher. This is a game where Marshawn Lattimore could return for Washington and really help out that secondary that needs some help. It would also be against his old team and two old quarterbacks, or two backup quarterbacks, two young quarterbacks, but two old team quarterbacks that he would have seen often in practice. Bit of a narrative-y, subjective angle. I think it matters for this Commanders defense that obviously went out of their way to add him to the lineup, and he's going to be a big boost. So Washington out of the bye has that advantage on defense. You think about the Saints' weakness on defense all season, it's been stopping the run. It is every week. Washington against the Titans, who have been a great run defense and rebounded this week, went for 257 yards on the ground. What do they change out of the bye? To be determined, but certainly a big advantage for Washington moving the football on the ground against this Saints defense. It's also Washington playing indoors, which is going to speed everything about this offense and Jaden Daniels up as well. So, big advantage for Washington on offense. Defensively, Lattimore is in. You probably see Jake Haener start, I would imagine, for the Saints. That's my guess. That is a big downgrade from Carr, especially without Taysom Hill, who is obviously out for the rest of the season and possibly the rest of his career. This is a Saints offense that earlier in the season, we were willing to rank worst in the NFL when they were down all of those pieces. Olave is still not going to be there. You're still dealing with a very thin wide receiver group, and you're back to that team that has these skill position and offensive issues. And so I could make the case that 7 possibly is still not enough for Washington. Miami on the road at the Houston Texans. Houston coming out of the bye, 2.5 on the look ahead. Reopen 2.5. I'm seeing 2 at DK. I'm seeing 2 at Bet Online. Interesting matchup put on the spot. I would want to try possibly find a way in to back Houston in this game. I wonder if this adjustment down is justified. I know they've really been struggling. It does feel like a bye has come for them at a good time. Much different matchup for this Dolphins offense against these Houston corners than what they faced this week. Intrigued a bit by the home team there. Jets on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. Good grief. Main screen television watching for so many in this game coming up next Sunday. Jets 3 - 10. They reopen 3 - 20. The Jets get bet every week. The Jags are off of a win. The Jets are off of another misleading loss. I would think that the Rodgers performance, given that it was his best of the season, is enough to keep him as the starting quarterback for this game. I would be pretty surprised if the Jets are not bet again. I would think that they take money again for another week. I mean, they're just getting bet every week. And if there was ever a misleading box score to entice more bets on them, perhaps another way working against the Jags, this seems like the matchup where that would be warranted. Cincinnati, Tennessee still off the board. Baltimore on the road at the Giants was 12 on the look ahead, reopens 14. Giants suffered more offensive injuries. 2 offensive line starters go down today. John Runyon, John Michael Schmitz. Drew Lock facing this Ravens defense without his center, and the Ravens coming off of a bye, facing a Giants D-line that is decimated with injuries and struggling to stop the run as is with some of these guys going down. Seems like a horrendous matchup. Can you trust the Ravens to play a full 4 quarters and cover the spread? We'll see. Kansas City, Cleveland still off of the board. Hopefully that is a game that opens up a lot higher off of a big KC win and cover on Sunday Night Football. Can you tell I'm invested into this game for Sunday Night Football? Dallas, Carolina still off of the board. Cowboys play tomorrow. Pittsburgh on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles 5-point favorites on the look ahead. Reopen -5. As mentioned, impressive game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Eagles, I felt like they were just hovering at 85% for the duration of the game. This is probably a game where you get much closer to 100% effort out of the Eagles, and you get it for 4 quarters. Now, the Steelers defense, a night and day matchup compared to what you just saw the Eagles face against that Panthers defense. This feels much more like the Ravens game for the Eagles matchup-wise than anything else. Perhaps we see the Steelers, depending on the Pickens' health, take money at this number. That's my initial gut impression. I don't have much of a personal take on the side or the total. But I wonder if this is too many for the Steelers, at least initially in the week at 5. Buffalo on the road at Detroit. Lions 2.5-point favorites on the look ahead. They're 2.5 currently at Bet Online, 2.5 at FanDuel, minus 120. DK is showing a 3. I don't know if that 3 is real or if the odds screen is playing tricks with me. I need a haircut tomorrow. If you're watching the live stream, you can probably see the eyebrows dancing a little bit. Certainly an intriguing side here for me that I'm looking at. We'll talk more about this later. Indy on the road at the Denver Broncos. Broncos 5.5 down to the reopen at minus 5. We're seeing circa at 4.5. When we're talking about games that have big playoff implications, and we are talking about games that have a big win probability shift either way, this certainly falls square into that category. Long-range forecasts in Denver in mid-December are incredibly fickle as they come. Right now, it looks like there is a chance of precipitation. It doesn't seem like it is going to be freezing temperatures. It is a complete gamble on the forecast. I think the forecast is important in this game because you obviously have a Colts team coming in from an indoor environment, playing outdoors against the Denver Broncos. So there could be a home field advantage layered in here if the conditions swing towards the advantage of the Broncos. That could keep this total down lower than it does. 43.5 reopens, 43 shaded under. I see 42.5 at circa. Perhaps compared to Thursday night football, this one with the shorter total in that profile is more enticing to me at the moment. Denver is playing with so much confidence. And against these looks for the Colts, I would fully expect the O-line to hold up and then be able to get the run game going. The Colts just don't go out of their way to bring a lot of blitzes, which is where we've seen Nick struggle. If that O-line can win against 4-man pressures, Nick's is going to have time to work in this game. On the flip side, I sure think Richardson in this run game can work against this Broncos defense too. This is going to be a big test for this linebacker crew that's played great. So that total looks initially enticing to me at the moment, just fitting into that profile. And this fits that ugly over mentality last year with some of these games. I think about all the Browns games last year, the Steelers games last year in December. This feels a lot like that. Tampa Bay, LA still off of the board. New England on the road at Arizona. Cards 7 down to 6.5. Cardinals took very real game day money in the market against the Seattle Seahawks. We saw that number tick up for them. I sure wonder here what's left for Arizona. The Pats have played so tough down the stretch, especially in the fourth quarter. They just do not lie down ever in games. Does Arizona get back up after effectively having their season ended at home in this game? A lot of motivational aspects to handicap in this one. Green Bay on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. My goodness. 2.5 on the look ahead for Green Bay. The reopen is 2, minus 10. I am surprised that this was adjusted down. Green Bay was bet all week against the Lions. Regretfully so from my part, laying 3.5 earlier in the week. Obviously a bad bet. There were 3s available. If you did get them, you got the push. They were bet all week in the full game market, especially on game day. They were bet in play. That number was shaded so heavily to Green Bay for 4 quarters. That game was shaded more in play than any other game this season has been shaded. The second half price for Green Bay in the halftime window got bet up 2 full points at the books with the highest limits. The amount of pro money that was fired into Green Bay last week, pre, in, and halftime during the game was substantial. And to me, that reflects the viewpoint of the Packers, but also the viewpoint on the Lions. Now, when you think about how that game played out, Lions score a couple times on 4th down. They get the big conversion late. Packers were certainly in there and competitive. The Seahawks, on the other hand, have been faded in market the last couple of weeks. The Jets took money 2 weeks ago. The Cardinals took money this week. I know there was a pro that played Seattle earlier in the week. he was right this week, and very good for him. Late week money and the bigger bets at the bigger limits have gone against Seattle. So we have two contrasting teams and how they have been bet the last couple weeks. And in this game, we are seeing the line adjusted down opposite of how these teams have been bet. I would be surprised if the Packers do not get bet at some point this week. I also watch these Seahawks games. I'm becoming a bit of a Seahawks homer, living a couple hours north of them. I've been watching them start to finish. To me, and this is maybe a little bit, maybe I'll take criticism for it because it's kind of gut feely. It feels like this team is really hanging on. Like really hanging on. I know there's defensive improvement. It just like, I always talk about teams and ranges and ratings. You get 4 overperforms a year, you get 4 underperforms, and you get 9 or 10 games right to what a team should be. It feels like right now the Seahawks are redlining at their absolute peak. And it might be something that Mike Macdonald is good enough as a coach to sustain and continue, and the defensive improvements have been amazing. This game sure feels like a different class they're stepping into and a different matchup and a different scenario. Packers should get back Dobbs as well. I can't imagine the Seahawks taking money at this rate coming down. I don't know. I don't know, guys. Chicago on the road at Minnesota. Vikings from 5.5 up to 6.5. Would expect this to maybe touch 7. We think about Minnesota at home closing right at this number today against the Atlanta Falcons. At this point, are you rating the Bears much different than the Falcons and how they were playing? There'll be reference to the first meeting between these two teams and how that played out tightly. The number in that game specifically, if we're looking at what the first close was, played a couple of weeks ago on November 24th. That was Minnesota closing 3 at Chicago. That game was 30-27 final. Chicago scored a couple times late to muddy that one up. But that's probably a fair adjustment, and I think what we've seen the Vikings close at the last couple of weeks makes that a fair number. Last game, double header for Monday Night Football. Atlanta on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Falcons from 3.5 out to 4. Falcons pushing up a little bit. This is entirely being driven by the Aidan O'Connell injury in what looks like Desmond Ridder will start. O'Connell left the field in an air cast. And so that is a Falcons game getting adjusted up because of the injury to the Raiders quarterback. Other injuries, Aidan O'Connell, Derek Carr, John Runyon, John Michael Schmitz, the O-lineman for the Giants, Antoine Winfield, and Bucky Irving for the Bucs left the game, did not return. Returnees this week, Buffalo will get back Coleman and Kincaid. Green Bay should be with Romeo Doubs returning, and then New Orleans will Washington will get back Marshawn Lattimore in that game on defense. That is the way some of the returnees are looking for NFL week number 15. Mike D says he laid Falcons -4 in Las Vegas. Offense looked pretty good today against Minnesota. I would agree with that as well. Okay, that'll do it for me and the openers. I think there was a lot to take away for those of you who are listening from this. We most certainly will have releases going out tomorrow morning. So if you're intrigued by that, you want to head over to raspicks.com for more details. Big one tonight on the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll bring the sides and totals record for the paid service to 40, 30, and 2 for the season if the Chiefs can win and cover 3.5. We'll also save the Wednesday live stream as well. We'll keep the Sam P video going on a heater too. And so a lot tied into the Chiefs tonight from the service, from bets, from media, from videos. Lots on the line, and hopefully it is a Chiefs win and cover. You'll know how I'm feeling in about 3 hours if you listen to the podcast now. If you're listening on Monday morning, you'll know if it is a happy or angry coffee that I'm drinking based on how that game plays out. So that is it for me. Next releases will likely be tomorrow between 8 and 8:30 a.m. Pacific. Hope everybody has a fantastic Sunday evening and Monday, and we'll chat with each and every one of you again bright and early on Tuesday morning.